Hello, I am James. Today I'm going to critique the conservative critique of capitalism. I myself am a libertarian, and I think as a libertarian, so you might notice a little bit of bias there. But for now, let's just get into it.
Seconds of the video to leave a dislike and an angry response calling me a communist before even watching it.
Communist.
And goodbye. All right, now that that's out of the way, comrades, working men and working women, collective farmers, brothers and sisters, guerrillas, we must fight for the socialist revolution. Fight to the end until the complete victory of the proletariat and the overthrow of the international bourgeoisie. Long live the worldwide social... Seriously, people. You do not have to join the Red Army to recognize that capitalism has some problems. You can even love it and realize this.
Yep.
But the truth is, one could create the greatest system in the universe, but as soon as you insert humans, said system will have issues. Check out...
Okay, that's actually true. People behave differently and nothing can be done 100% efficiently because us as humans, we have mistakes. We make mistakes all the time.
Garden of Eden. We suck. Especially when we were given the freedom to suck. I'm not sure when exactly this Republican worship of capitalism began, but it is a problem, and it needs...
It's actually not a problem. It's what brought prosperity during both the 80s and the 90s.
Capitalism is just a system of economics. It is not a god, it's not a moral system.
Yes, it's not a moral system, neither is communism. No economic system is based around morals, and nobody says it is. Capitalism is effective, and the reason why people worship it is because it works. Communism doesn't. Countries have tried it, and it led to famine.
And it's not going to save us. And in fact, in its current highly toxic form, has arguably been the downfall of both traditionalism and conservatism.
Not true. You're allowed to be traditional in your own private life. Nobody's taking away your right to be traditional.
And coincidentally is the most powerful weapon currently used by radical socialist activists who seemingly have given up the class war in favor of winning the culture war hand in hand with big corporations. So let's jump right into it and go through the three main problems I have here and why. 1. The amount of power corporations have is too damn high.
Mainly because corporations work with the government, and this is called cronyism. Corporations work with the government to create regulations that keep down smaller competition. This is what makes the market less free. I would say that most capitalist activists are against cronyism, because it hurts the market.
I have a lot in common with libertarians. I ran for the Libertarian Party. I generally want to be left alone and not have the foot of the state constantly on my throat. However, where I tend to part ways with my libertarian friends is I think there are significantly more threats to our freedoms than just the state, such as the many violent, non-government authoritarian criminals and foreign terrorist groups that exist.
All of which are created by government in one way or another. The valuables that gangs will move around is created because the government outlaws certain things, making them valuable. Same thing with terrorist organizations. The only reason they have power is because we have outlawed things, making them valuable so they can trade them and get capital to become violent.
All people I don't particularly want entering my country or running around freely.
Yes, because if those people truly are violent, they would have committed a violent crime and most likely wouldn't be free if law enforcement were a thing.
Libertarians will often disagree with me and respond by saying, sure, Lauren, violent people exist, but they are just not as big a threat as the all-powerful state is to our freedoms. Therefore, no matter the potential benefits of the state in stopping or reducing other evils, it must be abolished or at least severely reduced.
No libertarian wants the abolition of the state. You need the state to protect things like basic private property. Although state intervention is usually bad, you need it to do very basic things. Only anarcho-capitalists and anarcho-communists, for that matter, would want the abolition of the state, and they're just radicals that have no proof of their ideals.
Because they are the bigger problem, which, fair enough. Deal with the greatest threat to freedoms first. The only problem here, though, is that the government is no longer the 800-pound gorilla.
Actually, that's not true. The government has gotten only bigger if you look at how much it spends.
It's more like an organ grinder's monkey dancing to corporate music.
Yeah, that one actually is pretty true. The government is controlled by lobbyists that are paid for by massive corporations, and then they create regulations that keep down smaller businesses. This is not a secret.
Largely controlled by corporate lobbying pressure, campaign donations, and now even censorship of politicians we once would have thought were more powerful than said corporations.
I like living in a world where corporations, well, not just corporations, but anybody can do something against politicians without getting the government crushing them. Would you rather live in a world where the government can simply just take away your rights at an instant without any justification? Or a world where you're able to run an organization where you can keep a government official off of your property?
Corporations. And the worst part about the corporations having this power is we didn't elect them.
Not true. You paid them, or you bought a product from them. You might have donated to them. There are ways that we build up these corporations. It's all voluntary.
Oh, we didn't vote for them with our dollar either. I'm sure a lot of us would much rather go to our local shops and hire our neighbors for jobs over some faceless, nameless corporation, but unfortunately it's becoming near impossible to compete with global monopolies utilizing slave labor to drive down prices while we have to adhere to reasonable local labor laws.
And there you go. There's the crux of your problem. Regulations like minimum wage laws keep down smaller competition. You just defeated your own argument. The problem is not the market, the problem is intervention in the market.
All of the government grants, tax cuts, and favoritism for big business elites.
What did I just say?
It is simply not possible to compete, which is tragic for hardworking small businesses and medium businesses, which I, and I'm sure many of you, really support. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what you are all thinking. Lauren, this is not real capitalism you are talking about. This is crony capitalism.
She figured it out! Oh, she figured out the obvious.
And you'd be absolutely right. But here's the kicker. Real capitalism has never been tried. Just like how real communism has never been tried. Both of these and systems on a large scale are ahistorical constructs. We have never lived in a world where millions of people have had to share with each other the way a family does.
Yep.
And we have never lived in a world where everyone buys and sells from each other with no restrictions or aggression.
That's actually not true. Right after feudalism was coming down, the early capitalists were as close to unrestricted as you can get when the feudal lords were finally coming down and the leadership hadn't reacted yet to the capitalists. So there was a time, and that was actually the greatest capitalist growth when feudalism came down.
From anyone else. So if we want to deal with reality, what we have to examine is how capitalism has actually worked in history. And to my libertarians, a little side note, if you need to mentally put the word crony in front of capitalism for the rest of this talk to get through it, that's perfectly fine.
My copium levels are so high, that's what I'm gonna do.
Like I said, you're not wrong, but I'm speaking to the system in place today that Republicans often defend as capitalism. And history tells us that this system can absolutely lead to brutal, authoritarian, and freedom-threatening results.
Only one government gets involved.
As it is quickly doing so today. Corporations have the power to politically manipulate populations, to deny us our speech, and even to control our thoughts and feelings through algorithms.
Okay, I get what she's saying with this. She's going after the tech companies that will sometimes ban people with thoughts that the owner of the tech company might not like. But the market has already solved this problem. There are smaller platforms that are basically unregulated by the company, and they just let whatever goes on there that won't get them shut down go through. Look at things like Gab. And Parler has been resilient. Most people say, oh, it's the big corporations taking down Parler. No, Parler, once they were taken down by Amazon, they got their own servers, and now Parler's back. And people who do want to use Parler use it. Voluntary. That's capitalism. People who don't like Reddit will use other older style forum boards that aren't as moderated as much. Very simple. People who want a platform with no censorship go to a platform with no censorship.
That is terrifying. And despite this, you still have Republicans out here defending it as just a private company. And another peep you may hear from them in defense of our corporate overlords is, well, at least they can't throw you in jail.
They can't.
At least they won't put you against a firing wall or start wars. Yeah, sorry. That just doesn't quite line up with history either. I could do a whole video on private war profiteering.
And for the most part, that happens when, get this, private companies work with governments.
Massive companies and corporations like the Dutch East India Company not only kept and sold slaves, but had private militaries larger than entire countries' militaries, and eventually became so powerful they could invade and become the acting government in areas in which they had business interests.
You know what I'm about to say, but why do you think those came to success?
To pretend that if we just abolished the government.
Nobody wants the abolition of the government, and because your example is the modern Republican Party, it's so far from that. Except for a couple of anarcho-capitalists whose population makes up themselves and maybe their friends. It's nobody wants the abolition of the government. Ignore the anarchists.
Corporations would ever even think to oppress us, to fill that power vacuum and take away our liberties, is madness. In fact, there is already legislation being proposed to allow Nevada tech companies to form their own governments and...
Yeah, hold on. I want you to think about this one, though. They're just allowing them to buy up certain bits of land and then have the same powers as a local government. Now, if they were doing that on a federal level and say, yep, Facebook can just buy the entire New Mexico area and rule it on its own. Yeah, that might be a bit problematic, but these are very small local governments. It's not a problem.
Cities. So people, if you are skeptical of and you don't like big government, you really should be just as worried about big corporations.
Big government creates monopolies that are the big corporations that you're complaining about, so I don't see why there's a problem here. There's no conflict.
Because they don't want to uphold systems which made them wealthy, as those very systems may allow for their replacement and failure. And thus, they want to become your government and eliminate competition and question. And I fear that these mega corporations are getting very close to that. So instead of daddy government on our throats, we'll just have, Google soldiers TM putting us up against firing walls for illegally downloading Gab or Parler to their devices and sharing our Netflix account with more than 10 friends.
Alright, once again, that could only come to rise if there were no government, and also that would violate the laws of murder, for obvious reasons.
But let's move on, because this second one is a far more important point.
Before she gets to this, I want you to understand that the only way for a system to destroy your culture is for some sort of governmental, centralized force to take away your freedom of expression. That's the only way for that to happen.
And that is capitalism's destruction of community and culture. I often see many on the right lamenting the loss of old traditional architecture, community, family, and art, and yet at the same time proposing capitalism as a solution.
I don't think anybody says, oh, it's the solution to modern people having freedom. More freedom. No, nobody says that.
It's not. Not even a little bit. Capitalism has no incentive to preserve our culture or communities.
But it does give you the ability to do so on your own. Capitalism doesn't take your right to be traditional, doesn't take away your right to be culturally progressive. It gives you the freedom to do whatever you want in your private life. You just can't take away another person's right to be progressive.
I'd argue has negatively impacted families. I think where this confusion comes in is some people observe that Marxism works in opposition to capitalism, and to deconstruct the nuclear family, and assume, therefore, capitalism must be working to oppose Marxism and to support the family. But capitalism is not Marxism's counter. It came about before Marxism and is therefore indifferent to it.
Well, this is true. Capitalism did come before Marxism. Marxism completely opposes capitalism. That means that if there's something that happens in capitalism, whether it be a market-based system or the ability to own capital for yourself, then Marxism does not believe in that. So, if you follow that logic, then what you said is wrong. So, if in some magical world, the idea of capitalism was just the family, and because Marxism opposes capitalism, then Marxism would oppose the family.
It's simply an alternate system. And while that system can certainly bolster some people's family lives and wealth and material goods, capitalism only moderates for the markets and not for the souls and well-being of its workers. There is a reason defenders of capitalism talk about how people can't eat in communist societies, because capitalism is really, really good at creating surpluses of goods for physical needs. But does it serve, your safety needs?
Well, nothing's stopping it from serving your safety needs. If there's a demand and a demand that can bring in profits, then yes, safer systems will get put into place. And they have been, even without government intervention.
Not really. Your financial security can be wiped away any minute by the stock market.
Now, why would the stock market crash? Well, most of the times when we do see it, it happens because of government regulations. The Great Depression was largely caused because of the Federal Reserve destabilizing everything. 2008 market crash was caused by forcing banks to give out loans to those who couldn't pay them back. This is very simple.
Does it serve needs relating to love and belonging? No.
That's not true. Most capitalist systems, assuming the government isn't stepping on you and it's not state capitalism, allows you to have the liberty to do what you want in your private life. And as long as everything's consensual, then yes, it does allow you to have love and belonging.
Having a wife or a husband, and definitely kids, is a drain on your productivity and resources.
Wow, I'm pretty sure families still exist.
In this culture, apparently it's irrational to limit yourself to just one person. Might as well just use Tinder and count yourself lucky to live in a free society, you prude. Does it serve needs related to esteem? Does anyone feel esteemed in an assembly line or in a job where their boss treats them like they should be grateful the company has room in the budget for free coffee? Does it serve needs related?
Yeah, okay, that actually is a problem, but once again, not created by the market, created by government interventions. Government interventions create companies that grow to a size where they can force workers into low-wage positions. Low-wage positions that they do not want. And also, the market doesn't take away your ability to unionize. Private sector unions were a thing and solved many problems before the government stepped in.
Self-actualization. I don't know. You try self-actualizing in a gig economy or in a world where you can lose your job the instant you self-actualize in a way that Twitter doesn't like. Also, on a side note, Marxism may have told women that being wives and mothers was shameful, but it was capitalism that broadcast that message so that all of those women would enter the workforce and drive down the wages of their husbands and sons.
Yeah, I don't see what she's getting at this. There was wage growth when women entered the workforce. Wage growth didn't stop, and actually it happened during an era of massive wage growth.
Can we really say that it's all just government systems that have ruined our happiness? Or perhaps could some of us admit our work life, addiction to media, obsession with pursuing the next shiny product, the constant demands that we buy things to look a certain way, feel a certain way, watch this, buy that, play that, drink this, eat that? Could it perhaps be this mass consumerism and work-life imbalance that has also ripped us from our family, community, and loved ones? And
government creates the work-life imbalance. I just explained that 2 seconds ago. And also this consumerism problem. Yes, it probably is a problem, but once again, it's a thing of consent. There's nobody holding a gun to your head to buy the latest smartphone.
In many ways as well. What Hannah Arendt called the vita activa, a state where we must always be busy, never present, and always consuming. It's just soul destroying. And even if we move on to other factors leading to cultural decay, such as mass immigration with no assimilation, that too has largely been pushed and supported by corporations looking for cheap labor.
And once again, why do you think they're going to be able to get that cheap labor? Because of government regulations putting them on top and government regulations pushing down private sector unions.
As for old architecture, the utility of a building being nice relative to its price just doesn't add up. And don't tell me there's not a demand for beautiful buildings when people are flying halfway across the world just to take pictures with them.
There's a demand for people to see them, but not everybody wants to live in them.
Is that the demand clearly doesn't lead to enough profit. Visual joy of the citizenry in daily life is not a business. This is in large part why the left have won the culture war. They didn't care that their arts degrees weren't particularly profitable. They just wanted to create art. And sure, I'm conceding ground to progressives in some regard, but I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that you can eat an art degree or that it was the arts that doubled our average lifespan. That was absolutely innovation pushed by commercial interests and capitalism. But the question still arises, what is the point of a long lifespan if increasingly people aren't wanting?
Yeah, alright. This is once again. Let's read through it. Nearly 60% jump in suicides by young Americans since 2007 has experts alarmed and somewhat puzzled. They don't understand why it happened. There's no proof that this happened because of capitalism. And then suicides among children and young people aged 10 to 24 rose 57% from 2007 to 2018, according to a new report from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Once again, this has nothing to do inherently with capitalism. Do you think people just didn't commit suicide under communism?
Said life. Ultimately, we cannot understate how consumerism makes surviving insultingly easy, but we must also acknowledge it makes living insultingly hard.
I don't know what she means by this.
Now, the last one here, number 3. Capitalism is indifferent to morality.
Good.
Capitalism is not a conservative view of the world.
Well, it shouldn't have to be, right? It doesn't take away your right to live conservatively, and it doesn't take away your neighbor's right to live a more progressive lifestyle.
It's not a political view at all, really. It's simply a tool which sways towards the highest bidder. If you live in a culture that is deeply sickened, the products that are both created and sold will sicken with it. They won't save it. They won't pull you out of your moral darkness. Capitalism just amplifies what we as humans desire in our hearts.
Now imagine this. We live in a society where, let's say, it's all run by a bunch of crazy anarchist Satanists. I think that's something that she wouldn't like, right? Now, if this were a communist society, where it's a bunch of anarchist Satanists that hate you, then the state would force you to become an anarchist statist, an anarcho-Satanist. But if this were a capitalist system, you would have the ability to, in your own private life, be who you want to be. Live however you want. You don't have to be what other people say you have to be in a capitalist society. You have your own self-agency.
Which is why it has done very wonderful things, worthy of praise. But if you are a nation that has lost morality, if you are a nation that has lost God, capitalism just becomes the devil's playground.
What does she mean by this? Once again, capitalism does not force anybody to anything. Capitalism only does one thing. It's a market system that allows for growth. And there's nothing related to morality about it. If you want to be moral, or whatever you consider to be moral, or you want to believe in whatever religion, whether it be Christianity or Islam or whatever, then you have the individual liberty to do so. Just don't take away another person's rights. This is very simple. This is how America was founded.
Go ahead. Ignore your family and friends so you can work to fund your alcoholism. I don't know, spend all night feeding your porn addiction and buying your way past a girl's modesty. Pay for followers to feed your narcissism, why don't you? And Go ahead, consume the cheapest product provided by men and women only held to their desks by the factory suicide nets, preventing them from jumping to their own death.
Yeah, and that stuff only happens in nations where the government controls a lot of the stuff. That happens in China, where it's a state capitalist system, where the state capitalist system and the government forces low-wage workers into what's basically slavery. Yes, this is a problem, but it's not created by the market, it's created by the state. And yes, all the other things that she said before that are also problems, but they're all voluntary.
I'm sorry, but there is a reason that even the most stringent conservatives like Sir Roger Scruton,
if Sir Roger Scruton is somebody you look up to, maybe there's a very big problem with you.
often describe themselves as reluctant capitalists. Because modern capitalism is a deeply sick system, and progressives are not wrong to call that out. If you can't acknowledge where your opponents are correct, you cannot argue with them on where they are wrong. You can't even begin to explain to them that this is crony capitalism. You can't even begin to argue that it's a user issue and application rather than the system itself, without acknowledging that there is an issue in the first place. Truth is not found in political absolutes.
Nobody says there aren't problems. I don't know what she's attacking.
It's not found in platitudes either. As one of my most respected mentors and professor, Ron Dart, always reminds me, truth is often found in the tension. That is to say, not absolutes, nor even the center, but constantly questioning and challenging ourselves and our beliefs. And as I mentioned at the start of this video...
Yes, this is actually true. Always question your beliefs and look for other ideals. I don't just look at only libertarian stuff. Here I am looking at a conservative belief. Always look for other ideals, because no idea is 100% perfect. There's always something better. You need to look for it, so you can think, you can find solutions.
Some of you may be itching to call me a socialist for publishing this.
I'm gonna call you a socialist, even though I know you're not.
Consider that you're watching this video on YouTube. Literally any minute, with no warning, YouTube could alter its terms of service to include a provision that lets them ban this video.
And you can move to Storyfire.
And then do it. How does this make them any better than countries who censor political dissidents?
Mainly because countries that censor political dissidents tend to be violent, and there is no alternative.
My banning from the UK cut me off from speaking face-to-face with 68 million people, potentially. And even if I had a primetime slot at the BBC and attracted the entire viewership of the UK, I still wouldn't get a fraction of the influence and reach that's available on YouTube. YouTube gets 8.6 billion monthly visits worldwide, literally more engagement than there are people on planet Earth. Their daily views are in the billions, and YouTube can cut you off from that audience anytime it likes.
Well, yes, and YouTube can also go under at any moment due to competition, because there's not that many government protections for them, which is a good thing. And that's why there are alternatives that you can go to. Nobody is putting a gun to your head saying, use YouTube.
And with no warning or explanation. And because of the power of its lobbying, there is currently no chance to fix that problem. And if you complain about that massive, unaccountable, super governmental power over worldwide speech, you get accused of supporting literal centralized planning of all resources in society by some Republicans, as if there is no middle ground between, hey, I think corporations have gone a bit far, and submitting yourself to Big Brother. Which is why I say this to any in my audience currently itching to call me a socialist. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Well, yes, because when people call you a socialist, when you're advocating for policies that a socialist would advocate, yes, they're not using it in the 100% perfect usage of the word, but in practice, socialism is not what it is in theory.
Now, do I have a solution for this? Great question. No, I got nothing. Sorry, guys. But to be fair, this is probably why we've let things get so whack. Because all of our solutions to these problems with capitalism throughout history have created much bigger problems for us than the initial one we were
Communism.
trying to solve, including the death and torment of millions. So I guess I can see why people are a bit hesitant to brainstorm on this one, but I would rather honestly speak about the flaws in capitalism with my head held high than pretend it's perfect by burying my head in the sand, I guess. And We can't really ignore these problems forever, as the more we pretend they don't exist, the more people will turn to radical solutions rather than reasonable healing.
Yes, that's true. If there's a system that has some problems with it, you should try to reform it before people go to more irrational beliefs. This is the problem with crony capitalism. People see problems in the healthcare systems and can't look past all the regulations protecting the pharmaceutical. They can't look past any of the government provisions that protect all the pharmaceutical companies. They can't look at our crazy IP laws. No, they just look at the system itself, and that's the problem. We need to reform those things. And those aren't even capitalism problems, those are cronyism problems.